So all within this one patch we've got. Let's jump into Logic and I'll show you where I'm at currently with my string and orchestral template. I've got loads of samples, kind of, not loads, but kind of a modest amount of samples so far kind of loaded that are fairly typical. But what I want to focus on in this part is this section up here called Sketch. And so what I've done is I've set myself up so that it's very easy to play stuff in as I hear it. And this is very different to the way that samples tend to work out of the box, because the samples in modern times tend to be good at doing different things, knowing that as a whole you can get the sounds across multiple patches. My intention with this patch setup was actually very different. I don't necessarily care about it sounding amazing. I just want it to be incredibly responsive and to just really be reflective of what I have in my head. So first of all, I'll just play a little bit. The key thing that I wanted to show here is how I've got different mixture of short and longs just kind of happening spontaneously. And I'm using a breath controller here to control the dynamic, but I'm also using my attack of my fingers to determine how much of the spiccato note comes through. So I can get a very strong attack, or I can, if I breathe a lot but use a lower velocity, then I can get a slightly softer attack. I mean, it's not going to be perfect on the first pass, but it's definitely enough to kind of capture the intention. Typically, as I say, you'll have multiple articulations spread across multiple patches, or you have a kind of complex, to me, complex kind of key switching system that can sometimes lead to errors when you're editing MIDI data and so on. So the key concept here is layering a sustained patch, in this case a sustained string from Symphobia 2, with a shorts patch, in this case coming from Cinematic Studio Strings. And what that does is it gives you the flexibility and the speed to play faster lines because you've got a bit of attack on the front of the notes. Also, what I find helps to tighten up the sound is to deactivate any release samples, or to play with a release knob if there's one on the sample that you're using. That just helps to kind of clean everything up so you don't get the kind of overhanging samples when you let go of the keys. And then obviously if there's any reverb, you can play with the mic positions or the reverb to your taste, really. Funnily enough, now that samples have gotten more advanced, their ability to actually respond quickly and accurately to just keyboard input in general has kind of diminished. There are certain patches, for example the Cinematic Studio Strings Marcato patch with the spiccato overlay is something that kind of gives you back some of that immediacy. The reason I don't use that particular patch, just for anyone who owns this library, is because it has a very kind of intense sound to the sustains, which I didn't want to be the default string sound. This sustain patch has a much smoother sound. But yeah, you can find patches that are more agile, but generally speaking, the sample library developers tend to favor the realism of the samples doing a very specific thing as opposed to versatility and playability. And so that's a little bit antithetical to composing in a way. And then the next layer that I've got is a tremolo, actually. So all within this one patch we've got which is a real, feels very sort of exciting to me, because it just means I can get on and play, and I could have 5 of these patches loaded and just be playing in ideas with very little friction. So the way that I've set this up is I'm sending CC72 from this MIDI fader. It's pretty arbitrary. That's setting the volume here. And then in the back end of the sustain patch, I've got CC72 inverted on the volume here, so that it basically means the sustain's being turned down as the tremolo is being turned up, which is actually quite a nice effect. It's quite rare that I see this way of programming, but to have sustained blending into tremolo. So and you can probably hear that because these are multiple sample libraries, like the room sound on the tremolo is a little bit different. So it's not perfect, but really it's not about making them sound fantastic. It's about making them just super easy and fun to play, so that you can really sketch in ideas kind of as fast as possible. And not because you should be writing music really quickly, although sometimes that's necessary, like for a job or whatever. I think the point of reducing the time between sort of idea and getting it down on the page is more just to help you stay in that kind of flow of ideas. It just feels that it's much easier to kind of stay honest to your original intentions if you're able to kind of just here, play, almost just transcribing your thoughts. So yeah, I don't know. My sense is that would probably lead to better writing in general. So with the other sketching patches here, I allowed myself a separate pits patch. That's fine. I mean, it's not much issue. It's unlikely that you have kind of pits mixed in with legato lines, typically speaking. Oh, speaking of legato, with the strings, just before we move on, obviously I'm sacrificing the ability to have those nice legato transitions, but to me, for this sketching phase, it doesn't matter too much. If there's like maybe one moment where it's super important to have a string transition that goes like a sort of juicy portamento, I've got those kinds of string patches loaded down here. So with the flutes, I'm using just the Cinematic Studio woodwinds here, and again the same concept. I'm layering a staccato patch with a sustained patch, and I was adjusting the release time a little bit to taste and adjusting the volumes to taste, and that's it. Nothing going on in the back end here. I'll just play a little bit. I do actually have the vibrato set here. Crucially important is the fact that it is polyphonic. So again, for me as a keys player, it makes a lot more sense to conceive of parts sort of at the same time, rather than writing one part that goes and then writing a second part that goes. I'd much rather just stick my hand on the piano and go. So it's partly speed, but it's partly just easier for me to think just if everything's happening at once. So that's that. And then all of the other woodwinds kind of follow a similar pattern. Unlike with the strings where I'm using CC11 to change the overall dynamic, which allows me to keep the different patch layers, the short and the long, in the same relative balance. With these ones, I wanted to preserve the change of tone that happens on the louder dynamics, which you wouldn't get if you were just using CC11. So I am just using the mod wheel here, which means that sometimes on some of these patches, they can sound a little bit spiky. I don't know if you can hear, but there's a slight kind of extra attack on each note. But it's not really an issue. The point is that these are flexible, agile, polyphonic patches. For me, these sound reasonable, especially if you're just doubling a string line to have... sounds perfectly reasonable to me. If it was a solo part, I'd use a different patch. I'd use proper legato transitions, but... Oh yeah, so with trills and tremolos and things, I'm just doing them manually again because I happen to have a pianistic ability, so that's just the most simple way to, without interrupting my flow, to... So yeah, these are exactly the same. Again, I've just been messing with the release time, making it non-legato, adjusting the relative balances. They're different for every patch, so you just have to use your ears. I'm typically using this style of staccato rather than the other longer ones. Nothing special going there. With the trumpets, Cinematic Studio Brass. You know, it's not perfect, but again, it's the point is it's all just there, and it all basically functions the same way. I've done a few test compositions with this setup, and it's been really amazing to just kind of go straight into the flow of composing and not get constantly dragged into the weeds of trying to make stuff sound just like it is in your head. And so I guess the main takeaway of this, regardless of what samples you have, two things really. One tip is layer staccato and sustained patches, polyphonic sustains, as a starting point, and twiddle and maybe play with the back end a bit and kind of customize things to how you want. Customize them to your particular keyboard as well so that it responds how you want it to respond. Put in that work and then save it as a channel strip preset. But more generally, the idea is mentally thinking, okay, I'm going to limit myself to, for me writing orchestral music, I'm going to limit myself to these plus, you know, the odd harp or timpani or whatever. I'm not going to worry about making the legato lines sound really awesome, working in a consistent way, in a fast way. What it also means is if I want to, because everything's set up the same way here, I can just drag it over, stick it up an octave. Okay, so I would probably adjust that slightly because it is a bit aggressive, but if I want to double that on the oboe, I can just drag it over there like that. You know, no fuss, and it allows me to play with different colors and different orchestrations. The other thing that I've done is set some pre-delays up in the tracks beforehand, and yeah, there's various videos about that. There's an inherent delay before the sample makes some sound between you placing the key and hearing the sound. And so making sure that that's compensated for on all of the tracks is quite an important part of orchestral composing workflow, as I've discovered recently by watching some videos of other composers doing their thing. So that's sort of it, really. Yeah, that's my new orchestral sketching setup. There are limitations to this, so for example, with vibrato speed and vibrato depth, I don't have an easy way of controlling vibrato speed at the moment. I do have a way of controlling that with the woodwinds, but it would probably have to happen on a second pass, especially if I was playing something in with two hands. Oh, that's another limitation. Obviously, if I want to do any kind of weird stuff, it's a bit harder. I'd have to find ways of kind of just putting placeholders in there. You know, I'm talking about stuff where the players might move their bow really close to the bridge momentarily and things like that. That kind of data would be hard to capture. I think I'll leave it there to try and keep this video fairly focused, but it's not really a sort of advice video. It's more just I wanted to share this kind of, to me, quite a revolutionary way of thinking about and using samples. I'm getting much more back in tune with that older way of working, that more focused way of working, where it's about ideas first and then you just write them down or you just make them happen on your sequencer, and it's not about finding out what's possible to sound like realistic or sound reasonable with the samples. That's not what's dictating your creative decision making. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. Thank you very much for your attention. Let me know if you have any queries about specific stuff to do with orchestral sampling or music composition or anything else, and look forward to seeing you on the next video.